I go now? Like literally can't see anything. Is everyone ready?
Yes, you go now.
Okay. Welcome to Book Interrupted. This cycle, we are reading a book called They Called Me Number One by Bev Sellars. This is a story of an individual's experience at residential school.
What you just said is fine as a starter, really... and then you can add more later.
Okay, I'll see you guys in 5 to 50 minutes.
God. Kim is having technical difficulties and her computer froze. So she's gone away for a minute. So she will come back in a minute and explain why she chose the book. But for now, we're going to talk amongst ourselves until she comes back.
Right. So I haven't started the book. I don't have the book. I don't know. Again, the summer got away from me. I feel like life is falling apart, but that's fine. It'll get back together eventually. So I was reading a CBC article about the book. It talks about the author's experience in residential school, but also its impacts on like multiple generations. So, which is one of the reasons residential schools were so bad. I'm like, they're bad enough, but because the effects are felt over several generations, it will take a long time to not be feeling those effects, you know, in a family. And that's very sad. And I don't know, I think this book's going to be tough because just reading about the book brought on some very strong feelings. So I don't know, there might be
It was a tough read for sure. I finished the book and I knew I was in trouble after feeling an emotional kind of ping from the title and just not even being able to, based on my own experiences, understand why anyone would think that it's a goddamn good idea to call a child by a number. It was hard enough to get over that hump. And then I was like, no, somehow got like over that, and I'm going to continue to read because Kim has been really great at encouraging our group to be committed allies by continuing to learn and not forget. It will likely make me uncomfortable, and that is not enough for me to stop reading.
Yeah, someone posted on social media that it's not a good enough excuse not to tell children the history of residential schools in our school system currently, because that's an argument that it's too traumatic to teach children this. When children had to live through being in residential schools, then this generation of children can handle reading about what happened and learning about what happened. So I agree with that. And the forward of this book, that they believe that this book should be implemented in the school system. Yeah, for non-Aboriginal institutions to make this part of the curriculum.
Right, like learn the history of the country, not just the comfortable stuff.
Yeah,
like,
and not just from a colonial perspective.
Yeah, let's really just see what happened, you know, like really understand what happened in the past so we can not repeat it.
Yeah, I wish we'd learned in school. Like, we didn't get to learn any of these things, and that's horrible and unfortunate. And I think we would be at a different place now if we'd all learned about it when we were younger, instead of the whitewashing of our history that we learned in school. I started reading the book just a bit, but then that was a while ago. So I was looking through. I know it's going to be a hard book, but I flew through the first little bit, and I just haven't had time in the recent bit. But I think I don't know how, Carrie, you finished it, but I feel like
it was okay. Yeah, I think the emotional part is what added a slower pacing, but just to read the words themselves, it was very different from Jessie Thistle's book because, and I'm going to compare them because within Book Interrupted, these have been our two main like Indigenous stories, but like Jessie did a lot more showing in his storytelling. Bev did a lot more telling, which I find is an easier, quicker read because it's almost like just getting into like the factual, this happened and at this time with these people in this way, instead of getting into like symbolism and metaphor.
Yeah, I can tell at the beginning, it's very kind of factual and this is the information.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be, well, for me, I just started yesterday and I've already read through the 5th chapter. I think it's a quick read because she mentions a moment in time, but is immediately to the next moment. Another memory comes to her and then she mentions that. So it ends up going by quickly because the chapters are many moments constantly changing. And it's when you put down the book that you start going back to the things that she's mentioned that happened at the residential schools. Like, not a side note, but she mentions it, but she's already moved on to the next thing. So now you're moving on to the next thing. So it's only when you put down the book, you start like thinking about the moment she mentions. For instance, she said that, I think it was her grandmother or her mother would always make sure all the children, when they were home, had enough blankets at night, because what she remembers most is trying to sleep cold because they didn't heat the residential schools during the winter and they were always cold. So she mentions that, but then she's on to the next thing. So after you put down the book, you start thinking about it, you know, when you go to sleep, about how those children, they were cold and there was nothing, they couldn't complain or do anything. So I think the book is very difficult when you put it down, but it's going to be a very quick read as you read it.
Yeah. Because it's so like da-da-da-da-da-da, and it's almost chronological too. So like super easy because it's linear. It's not cyclical or circular the way that like Jesse's writing is. But you're right. It's like only when you put down the book and then those moments, yeah, Sarah, like what you were saying, they would start to sink in and then you'd be like, oh my God, what would that be like? But when you're reading it, you're not really processing what it would be like.
Right. So the emotional investment comes later. The processing comes later. But that is a very interesting, that's a great feature for a book like this. Because I think the emotional side is what makes it, people want to just say like, well, I don't want to feel those feelings, so I'm not going to learn. And if the book itself can let you learn first, and then the emotions come later, then maybe more of it sticks. You know, like when you're stressed, it's hard to learn.
Because it does increase the likelihood that a reader will get through more material. And this is very important information.
And potentially retain it too. Like when you read something under stress, you're less likely to retain it. And what we need is more people to learn about the past and remember. Yeah. Right?
Was anyone else shocked to learn about the lack of medical and health support? No. I just completely caught myself as I was reading it that I had this assumption that even though it's a residential school and like bad things go on there, surely they include medical care when it's warranted and needed. And I was blown away.
But like they called them residential schools, but they weren't schools.
They weren't.
Right? You know, they were prisons.
Yeah.
Right? It was, you're being punished for being who you are.
Like, and for her grandmother's generation and her mother's generation, they were basically concentration camps. They were work camps.
I know, eh? But labeled as a school.
The idea was sold that they are being, I don't know, like assimilated. Is that the word? Yeah.
The white man is helping them to be fully integrated members of our white European society.
Yeah, it's horrible. Oh, look, Kim's here. That's horrible. That's horrible. And yay, Kim's here.
Book interrupted. This interruption is brought to you by Road Warriors. Yup, that's a rascal. Just trying to drive, and I guess so is they. Let's see. Did you see that? Nobody stopped for that poor little rascal as he used the crosswalk. What are you, a pedestrian or a vehicle, sir? You got to make up your mind. Book Interrupted.
Hi.
Hello.
Why is your face like
You're
that?
back.
How was the update?
That's what happens when I have to go through that process twice in one morning.
Oh my.
Anyway, it's my fault. I need a new computer. What did I miss?
We were done. We talked about the book. We're all done.
It's over.
It's over.
You want to say why?
Yeah.
Why you picked the book?
Yes. So I picked the book because I made a commitment to try to highlight Indigenous authors or Indigenous stories, I guess, for lack of a better word, with this experience on Book Interrupted. I like the stumbling forward thing. I find it hard to know how to do anything without stepping on all of those white fragility related toes that you can as a privileged person trying to be an ally. And so that is why I picked a book by an Indigenous author. I also picked this book because I think around the time we were deciding on books, residential schools were, it was more in the media because of the original findings in, I think Kamloops was where the first mass grave was unearthed. And so I thought it was on topic too. Rather, like I narrowed it down to like a residential school kind of piece. And that is why I chose it. I also feel like it's super important that, so I'm hoping by me picking it, other people will now be exposed to it. And so more people will learn about or understand like just how crazy and bad and like unfathomable it is that like Canada, a piece of large chunk of Canada's history was this. So that's why.
Not only it was a large chunk this, but so many people don't know anything about it. Too.
Right. Or how long it went on.
Yes, and how like recent as well.
Yeah, and how specifically terrible it was. You know, some people may have an awareness, but you know.
Or that there were related laws that came about from it. Like what was the one law that I think Bev raised in the book when at one point Indigenous parents would go to, didn't they kind of lose their guardianship or parental rights, and that they would go and serve jail time if they didn't support in sending off their kids to this prison?
Yeah, like the Indian Act dictated they had to go to the school, as well as then the pass system really inhibited anyone from being able to come and visit. Because I don't know where you guys are. I'm, I think, chapter 5-ish. And
Sarah is.
Hey, spoiler alert, Bev ends up in the hospital, and the whole time she's imagining her grandparents are going to come see her any minute, and they never come. And then she adds the context, right? Like if they didn't have a pass, they couldn't, like they knew how severe the punishment would be if they were to rebel. And it's just so crazy because that was the laws. Like, could you imagine if the law was so infringing on your right? Like it's crazy to me.
All done under the guise of, well, this is to help them. This is to help them culturally be like
it's such a good example of like racism, right? They're need us. Them. Yeah, they're so savage, and let's make them like us. When the irony is, how savage is it to take fucking children away from families and like,
give them
brutal.
A number, strip them down, and shame them. The amount of shaming that Bev shared, the different tactics that were used in residential schools, everything was about shame tactics to make those kids feel like there is something inherently wrong with them.
And the thing that's crazy to me too is that like I don't know how conscious that was. Like I don't know that there was an instruction set out being like destroy them with shame. You know what I mean? I feel like it was just like a byproduct of the fact that what you are is not okay. What you need to be is not what you are. But anyway, that's what we're going to spend the next 10 years trying to do. And then also like the absolute power kind of dynamic, right? Where like they were treated as less than human. And so obviously that would come with a dose of shame as well. But like, it wasn't specifically instructed that they do that. And yet every kind of, well, not every, but like the majority of the tactics and management of the participants, or I guess captives is a better word, was done in such a way like that, right? Like it was all abusive.
Yeah, I don't think that there was, like, to your point, I don't imagine that there was like training for the nuns and like, I don't know, the priests to go to. And when you're teaching the children that we must make sure that you use shame tactics, you're right. I think it just came about. And I asked my husband what his experiences were like he didn't go to a residential school, but he did for the grand majority of his life go to Catholic school when it was run by the priests and the nuns. He said it was horrible. Yeah, anytime you had an idea that was counter to the narrative of what you were supposed to absorb, you would be reprimanded. You were not an individual. You take orders.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. It's also like, I mean, a reflection of kind of like the journey of children in general. Like there was a time when they were the workers at the most dangerous factories because they could fit into the parts that the grown-ups couldn't fit in. So they had to go like grease the wheels and whoops, we're killing kids. Like, yeah. So there's like a whole history of children like not really having any rights too, but then add like that layer of racism on top and that layer of superiority and, you know, discipline, and children should be seen and not heard, like all of that stuff. It's just pretty insane to think about how far we've come or how far we need to go still too, obviously.
You have to, those like nuns and priests and stuff must have like had to have believed so fully that they were doing the right thing in order to behave that way towards children. Like, I can't imagine believing in something that much that I would treat children that way, or that I would treat anyone that way. Like, it doesn't matter what they, you know, I know we're in a different life and generation and whatever, but like, that's just a basic human, like, decency. Like, I can't imagine believing in something that much, although I'm also not religious, so I guess.
Well, it takes different. Like a certain, like there's a huge component of dehumanization in order for someone to be able to do that to someone else, right? So that speaks to just how dehumanized the Indigenous population was, as well as some kind of a belief in corporal punishment. You know what I mean? Like some kind of an understanding that this is how you do it. I mean, I guess there's a kind of, I don't want to say generational trauma because I feel like that's like taking away from the Indigenous experience, but like speaking in the way of raising children and the knowledge that has been eventually kind of agreed upon. It was not like that in the beginning, right? Like you just beat your kids and then they came into line, right? Nobody realized, oh, that's abuse, and that's how you fuck them up too, right?
Or that there's other ways to go about addressing poor choices or poor behavior. Yeah.
But numbering them was another way to dehumanize them. That's what they do in the Holocaust too. Like that's like a tactic to dehumanize people by giving them numbers and not names, so it's easier to treat them less if they don't have a name.
Yeah, like this is off topic, but that's what some people say about protecting yourself against being abused, like maybe by a kidnapper or something, is like you tell them your name and like you try to humanize yourself so that they can't just separate you and do whatever, you know what I mean? Like, so it works both ways, I guess.
If you've enjoyed these video highlights, listen to the full episode on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to like and subscribe and ring that bell to be notified when new episodes are published. Find out more by going to www.bookinterrupted.com.
Never forget, every child matters.